Hello and welcome to Tech Raven, the channel that brings you all things audio production, video production and photography. I'm Nigel Cooper and today I'm doing a review on the Libec THX video tripod, which retails in the UK at around about £240. I personally bought this a couple of weeks ago so I could shoot a music video over the last 3 or 4 days, so I've had plenty of time to evaluate this tripod. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go through the pros and cons and give you my thoughts and feelings about the tripod. So firstly, it's designed for smaller cameras, DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. I've been using it with a Sony a7 III with a Sigma Art Series 24-70 lens, which is the camera that I'm currently filming myself on. And in a minute, I'm going to swap that camera over and put it onto here so I can show you how this tripod is set up and balanced. Now, while I'm on the subject of balancing, there's a lot of people on YouTube that don't know how to balance a tripod, and there's even some people giving tutorials on how it's done, and they're getting it totally wrong. A lot of YouTube seem to think that a perfectly balanced tripod is when you tilt down and you let go, the pan handle creeps back down with the spring tension in the head that pulls it back to its horizontal position. That's not what balancing a tripod is, not even close. So I'm going to put a link in the description below to a more detailed tutorial that I did on how to professionally set up and balance a tripod. So check that out. So in a minute, I will show you how that's done with this tripod. But first, I'm just going to go through some of the specifications. Now, it doesn't have any drag control for the pan and the tilt. So the pan and the tilt is preset in the factory, but it is a fluid head. It uses some sort of grease in there, so it's nice and smooth. Now, some other tripod heads will use fluid for the pan, but then a kind of a friction control for the tilt, which isn't very good, because that means if you want to do a Dutch tilt movement, which is when you basically pan from one corner, the top right to the bottom left, for example, so you're starting up here and you're coming down, it doesn't work that well because you've got like a fluid that's mixed in with that friction. So you kind of get this steppy motion, but you don't get that with this head. Also, another thing that is brilliant about this head is you don't get any kind of what I call creep back. With a lot of Manfrotto heads, in fact, with pretty much every Manfrotto head they do, you get what's called creepback, which renders them useless for any kind of video work. Now, what I mean by that is when you get to the end of a pan, for example, and you stop and you take your hand off the pan handle, the head just creeps back a few millimeters. Even if you've got the drag setting set quite low, they still do that. So imagine you're panning along and you get to the end, and then when you stop, it kind of goes, you know, it just nudges back just a little bit, and you notice it at the end of the handle in the clip, which renders all panning shots useless with those heads. Now, just a quick lesson on panning. For me, it's all about the first frame and the last frame. What goes on in between doesn't matter. As long as it's smooth and slow enough that it falls below your frame rate so you're not going to get judder, it's all about the first frame and the last frame. So for example, if you're going to start over here, you'd have like a nice Lamborghini in the shot for the first frame, and you'd pan around to reveal a castle, for example. Okay, stupid analogy, but you get my point. You should be able to take the first frame and the last frame, do a screen grab, print them off and hang them on your wall as photographs. They should make a good stills photograph in their own right. So for example, you could start over here on a Lamborghini, and then when you sort of pan across, it reveals a castle. So you've got two good subject matters at the beginning and end. Probably a bit of a silly example, but you get my point. So when you get to the end of a panning shot and you stop and you let go of the pan handle, the camera's still recording for an extra 5 or 10 seconds, so you get that extra handle at the end of the clip. So if when you get to the end, it sort of creeps back a few millimeters because of the design of the head, it's no good for video. And I have yet to find a Manfrotto head that works correctly that doesn't do this. Now, this isn't a bash at Manfrotto. The tripod that my Sony camera is on right now is a Manfrotto photographic tripod, carbon legs, and it's nice, but that's for photography, so you don't do any kind of panning shots with those. Okay, so like I said, there's no control for the drag amount of sort of drag you can dial in for the pan and the tilt, but it doesn't matter because I think Libec have got this nailed. They just seem to have tuned it to perfection. Now, in the past, when I've used more professional tripods, like some of the higher end Vinton Vision range that do have the controls for the amount of drag you can dial in for pan and tilt, I found that once I've set it, I leave it and I never touch it again. It stays there. So with this, it's basically not too heavy, yet it's not too light either. It's just got a nice amount on there of fluidity that allows you to get a nice smooth pan. And same for the tilt. It's just a very smooth honey light because of the fluid head, and it just seems to be the right amount. Now you haven't got any control for the balance either. In some of the higher end Vinton models, you've got this spring dial where you can basically tighten up the spring in the head so that the tighter you've got it, the more it's going to pull down, which is going to allow you to balance the camera or rig that you've got on it. This one's designed for cameras up to about 4.5 kilograms, thereabouts, I think it is. Now with my Sony a7 III, with a Sigma Art Series 24 to 70 f2.8 and a battery grip with 2 batteries in it, it balances to perfection. It's just perfect, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute. So, okay, a couple of the things that I don't like about it is the plate that actually goes on here. Let me just grab that. Okay, here's the plate. The plate design, I like the fact that it just sort of goes on sideways like that and clamps down, and then you just tighten that and it's locked in. Or you can actually move it back and forth to balance it off, and to remove it, you just basically slide that lever forward and it comes out. But what I don't like about the plate is, and God, it's not just Libec that do this, but Manfrotto, most tripod companies do it, is you just have this screw on the bottom here that you have to tighten up, which is a pain because on the Manfrotto stills photographic tripods, at least the one I've got, the little square plate it has, it's got a D-ring in it. So you're holding the camera in your hand, you can hold the D-ring of the plate and just put it on and tighten it and fold the D-ring away and you're ready to go. But with this, you've got your camera in one hand and then you have to kind of balance that on it, reach for a screwdriver and tighten up the screw. And it's a big pain in the butt, so come on Libec and everybody else, get rid of these silly screws. Everybody hates them, they're a nightmare. It means you've got to carry a knife or a 20p piece or a screwdriver in your bag so you can tighten it up. Just use D-rings here, that's it, nice and easy. So that's one thing that I don't like about it. Let me just tighten that up. The next thing I don't like about it are these screw mechanisms here to adjust the leg height. You have to basically give these a couple of turns and turn them round, and it's a big pain to do that because each time you loosen the leg, you have to turn it like 3 times to tighten it, and then you have to turn it a couple of times to loosen it off. Now, given that there are 6 of these, and you've got to give a couple of turns for each one, that's kind of like, what, 6 times 3, and you've got to do that to open it and close it, so you can double those figures. And then, given the fact that you've also got to, use a screwdriver on this, there's an awful lot of screwing activity with this tripod, and not of the pleasurable kind either. That's a bit of a pain, so I would have liked to have seen Libec use a different mechanism to this, maybe one of the little quick release kind of lock-in things like Manfrotto use on their photographic tripods. It probably would have only have costed maybe an extra 50p per section for Libec to have done that. And at the end of the day, I wouldn't have minded paying an extra £10 for this tripod if it had had a more quick release type locking system there. And also with regard to this sort of screw, again on the bottom here, let me just take that off. A D-ring wouldn't have cost any more in the manufacturing process. So those are 2 things that could have been fixed, maybe for a next model in the future, just to have made this tripod absolutely perfect. Okay, a couple of other things that I do like about it. It's got very little, given the cost, it's only about £240, it's got very little leg torsion or twist. Now what I mean by that is, if you basically grab your tripod a couple of inches down from the head and try and turn it like a steering wheel of a car, there's not actually too much twistiness going on. I bought this a couple of weeks ago from Production Gear. They're just north of London in England. And while I was down there, I did try another tripod out made by a company called Acebill 705. Similar price, but when I grabbed the tripod legs here and twisted them, the whole thing, honestly, I could turn it like a double-decker bus steering wheel, and the joints here were creaking, and oh, it was absolutely horrible, the worst thing on the planet. And also another thing about that Acebill tripod is the way that they've set the fluid head. It was too stiff. So this one's got a nice sort of balance, but with that one, it was so stiff. As you were moving it to the left, the legs were twisting around to the left, which means when you get to the end of the pan and stop, the legs move back a little bit and you get that sort of drift back at the end of the panning shot, rendering every panning shot useless. So you can't use those for any video work, just like you can't use any of the Manfrotto heads for video work either. Now this Libec THX, it does have a tiny bit of creepback when you get to the end of the pan and you slow down and you stop, but it's minuscule. and you only really notice the over 80mm, and it's a lot less than any of the Manfrotto heads or most other heads that I've tried. In fact, the only head that I've tried recently was a high-end Vinton, one of the higher-end Vinton Vision. In fact, it wasn't recently, a few years back. And when you get to the end on those, there's no creepback or no leg torsion, but they're like £2,000 or £3,000, so you get what you pay for. But in terms of budget tripods, this one really is as good as you can get. Now the head on it, I think it's a 65mm ball, so you can basically set the level on the spirit level. You just give that a turn and it's nice and level. But it's got another trick up its sleeve. If I just actually remove this and show you what I mean, most bowl heads are designed slightly different to this in that, when it comes off eventually, normally the thread comes out of here and the handle has the female part on it, and the bowl is perfectly round all the way under. Libec have reversed this. They've actually put the thread on this side and flattened off the bowl a little bit, so you can take the head off and you can put it onto like a glide rail or something like that. So it's actually got two uses. It's kind of like two for the price of one. So I really like that design. It's good. You can take it off and put it onto a monopod or a glide rail or anything you like. On the feet at the bottom here, some of these tripods have actually got a foot design where you can tighten up the rubber foot on the bottom, and as you tighten it and turn it in, it basically reveals a spike about ½ an inch long. This doesn't have that, but I don't mind, because out of all the tripods I've owned in the past that did have those spikes, I never used them anyway. Why would you want to basically pull spikes out and hammer your tripod into a field? It's not like you know, you'd hammer it in like a tent peg. It's not a ground sheet. It's not going to fly away. So I've never used those anyway, so I'm not bothered about it. The fact that this doesn't have any drag controls for the pan and the tilt or a spring tensioner for the balance doesn't bother me anyway. It just means it's a lot cheaper for them to make it that way, and it'll probably end up being a lot more reliable. So okay, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to switch the Sony camera over, put it onto here and show you how perfectly this balances and explain a little bit more about what balancing is. Okay, so the sun decided to come out from behind the clouds and bleach out my forehead totally. So to wrap this video up, I'm going to do it just here in my kitchen. So I was going to explain about the balancing and why the Libec THX is just perfectly balanced for cameras of this size. So I've already mentioned this is my Sony a7 III. It's got a Sigma Art Series lens, a 24 to 70 f2.8. It's got the Sony battery grip with 2 batteries in it. And at this weight, again, with no control over the balance, you haven't got a spring that you can dial it in or out, but it's set to perfection. So basically, when you balance a tripod, what you do is you basically get the camera's central point of gravity to sit directly over the dead center of the tripod head. So as you can see, I've got the camera back a little bit here, but that's to compensate for the weight of the lens here, especially when it's zoomed out a bit. So looking at this sideways on, you should be able to see here that the central point of gravity on the camera is about here, because you've got all the weight of the lens as well as the camera at the back. So that sits dead over the center of the tripod head. Now, when a tripod is perfectly balanced, what that means is you basically can tilt down into a shot, and bearing in mind that these lock-in controls here, because you've got a locker there, and if you basically turn it and lock it back, it's not going to go up or down, and you've got one here to lock the pan as well. But I've got both of these off, so it just pans and tilts naturally, nothing locked off there. So I tilt down into the shot, and I get to the end of my shot, it's there, I stop, and then take my hand off the pan handle, and as if by magic, the camera is staying there, it's still recording, and it's locked on that shot. So to make reference to that corporate video on cake decorating, you're filming the presenter and then you tilt down slowly into the shot, there's the cake, you stop, hand away, and the camera stays there, and it'll stay there all day. Now that is what perfect balance is, not having the camera spring back up to this central position. You don't want that. What's the point? That's the most pointless thing ever. And when YouTubers say that, it just really annoys me how they're teaching people incorrectly. Likewise, if you want to pan up into the air, you can pan up, you're panning up into the shot, you get to the shot that you want and you stop, a hand away from the handle, and it stays there. You don't have to stand there holding it, because as I've already mentioned, if you basically go into a shot and you have to hold the handle, your heartbeat, your body movements, it's going to make that image move. So you want to be able to just come down into it, take your hand away, and it holds. And this does it perfectly. You can actually go down quite a long way. Look, I can go right down to there, take my hand off the pan handle, and it's not creeping back up. As you can see, it's remaining there because of the inertia of the camera and the fact that this head is designed for cameras of this approximate size and weight. Likewise, if I tilt up, I can like come right up to here, stop there. I mean, I could actually get it further down than that, take my hand off the handle, and it's staying there. It's not going to move. So that is what perfect balance is. And because it's fluid for both pan and tilt, like I said, you can do those Dutch tilts, which is basically when you go from corner to corner. So I could basically be doing a shot down there and you sort of coming across and up at the same time, like an aeroplane taking off. And it does that with perfect fluidness because it's got this nice fluid grease in the head that allows you to do that. So that's what perfect balance is. Now, I've also got a little 5-inch monitor that I put on top of here with a little Sony battery on the back, and even with that on it, it's still coming in under the weight and it still balances and does the same action to perfection. So for my money, £240, well, I think I paid about 240 thereabouts for this. It's absolutely brilliant. It can't be beaten. Honestly, I've tried more expensive tripods for £500, £600, £700 that didn't work as well as this. So this is the Libec THX. Like I said, there's a link in the description below for how to balance a tripod, just so you can get a much deeper insight as to how a balancing system works on a higher end, more professional tripod. This doesn't have any settings to do it, so you don't have to worry about doing it. As long as you've got a camera like this, a mirrorless camera with a lens of this kind of size and weight, with a little monitor on top, that kind of thing, this will balance absolutely perfectly. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Check out my other videos on audio production, video production, and photography. And if you like what you see, subscribe. And I hope to see you again real soon. I'm Nigel Cooper. You've been watching Tech Raven. Bye for now.